Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Golf War. As promised today, we are going to be joined by Nico Marin coming up in just a little bit, and we will be talking about LIV's appeal to the international fan bases. Now, I think this is going to be a good episode to hear from somebody who can articulate why the PGA Tour has failed to reach younger audiences in the way that they do older audiences, but also explain in more detail some of the reasons that LIV actually does appeal to the younger audiences. And this is something that's going to be really key to the messaging strategies of both of the tours moving forward. Now, in the first 3 episodes, you've heard about those strategies, but now we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to understanding what exactly that means. So coming up right after this break is my interview with Nico Marin. Stay tuned. All right, welcome to this episode of the Golf War. As promised, we have our guest for this episode, golfer and international student Nico Marin. Nico, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Bubba.
So Nico comes from Chihuahua, Mexico, and I think he's a good person to have on because he's going to be able to talk about some of the viewpoints that we don't really hear often in the United States, specifically when it comes to golf broadcasting. So, Nico, I just wanted to ask you a little bit just to give the people listening a background about how often you watch the PGA Tour and how often you watch the LIV events.
So, there's, I think, around 25 and 30 PGA Tour events, during the season. I watch 4, which are the 4 majors, and probably 1 or 2 more events, but it's very rarely that I watch PGA Tour.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Nico and I are kind of the same in that perspective. I really only watch the majors or when Tiger's playing. But Nico, some of the problems in terms of watching tour events comes to how people outside of the U.S., how they can actually view these events. Can you kind of walk people through maybe some of the difficulties you have outside of the U.S. of accessing these events to watch?
Yeah, so for example, every tournament, every week, they broadcast the tournament in different cables or channels. So in my case, it's difficult to me to pay a lot of stuff to watch all the tournaments, and sometimes the tournaments are not even good to watch.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't get good shows.
And another thing I know we've talked about a lot is who the coverage even shows when you can view it is not players that you even like. And just to use you for example, we both like Abraham Answer. Well, he's not someone that the PGA Tour showed on their coverage a lot, even when he was playing well.
Yeah, I remember. It's a funny memory I have. I was, 10th grade?
Yep.
I remember Abraham Answer was winning the tournament, final day. For some reason, the Sunday was canceled. They had to play on Monday. I remember I took my phone to school, missed the class, just to go watch him play because I'm from Mexico. He's Mexican, so he's a big inspiration for Mexican golfers. I broadcasted from my cell phone. They barely show him, and he was leading. So it was very disappointing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a pretty common critique of the tour coverage is a lot of times they're just showing the big name stars, and you could have someone having the week of their career playing really well in a big tournament and they barely get any coverage. And maybe viewers in the US care about the people they're showing, but you're not really getting that if you live outside of the US. And so I think that is one thing that maybe LIV has appealed to international players. We had a conversation in one of our first episodes with Brad Smith, who was a former international player, and he kind of talked about how, a lot of these international players didn't have the same allegiance to the PGA Tour as, American players would. And I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's kind of the same thing for international golf fans. They don't have any allegiance to the tour because it hasn't really done a whole lot for them.
Yes, that's true, Baba. I remember a lot of weeks where not even just Mexican players, but other Latin players, they were having a good week, or they were playing, let's say, random time at a Saturday. doing the best round that day, they don't even like post the highlights or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't give them coverage.
Yeah, and I think, that's why we have seen a lot of Latin American players. We mentioned Answer, but also Carlos Ortiz. Well, he's on LIV, right?
Yeah, Joaquin Niemann, Sebastián Muñoz, Mito Pereira.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's definitely been a trend, at least from that part of the world, of international players going to LIV. Another thing I want to ask you about, just as far as when you're watching the LIV coverage, how easy is it for you to watch the players that you actually want to watch?
Well, it's easy because, first off, it's free.
Mm-hmm.
You can, in the US, you can download the app on your computer, your smart TV, or your cell phone, whatever. You just like create an account. You don't get charged. You don't have to put information or anything. You can watch it. And let's say I'm in Mexico, no?
Mm-hmm.
You can broadcast it from YouTube. It's free. And it's really easy to watch your favorite golfers because they develop a new like mode to watch where you can follow your favorite player.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say my favorite player is, I don't know, this guy and he's last. You can watch him play, even if he's last.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not really something you can do on the tour unless it's Tiger Woods in last place.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'd want to watch that, but not many people would actually want to watch that. So that's one thing that they've kind of done pretty new, but also really different, is giving you the ability to watch. And we've actually seen that catch on with like the Masters, for example. They're trying out new technology that allows people to do that, but it still hasn't expanded to the tour yet. So are there any other, I guess, maybe exciting developments that the LIV broadcast has done that maybe you don't feel like the tour broadcasts have done?
Well, just that thing that I told you about, like following your favorite player. Like I remember when I used to watch golf, it was when Ricky Fowler was really good, and then he stopped being really good, and then Answer came there and started playing really good.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, if I want to sit for 4 hours and watch this guy, but you sit for 4 hours and watch him hit like 10 shots.
Yeah, if that.
And each shot is like 10 seconds. So.
Yeah, and basically the rest of it is just showing people that aren't maybe even not even the tournament, just random guys who they think are fan favorites.
Exactly, and that just it's not good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you have voiced a lot of the frustrations that people have with the tour's broadcasts. Another thing that I think is kind of interesting is there's been this kind of schism between what I would call the traditional golf media, whether that's ESPN, Golf Channel, or just the different networks that broadcast it. That's really more geared towards older people. But one thing that's really been on the rise lately is this idea of like YouTube golfers, a lot of content on social media. And this is just something I've noticed, but I'm sure you have as well. Is it seems like a lot of those people are a lot more invested in LIV, and they're much more willing to talk about it or like have them on their YouTube channels, for example. Is that something you've seen as well?
Yeah, that's YouTube golf has been a big impact, and you see some of the players starting their own YouTube channel. For example, this guy named Bryson DeChambeau started his YouTube channel. For context, for guys that don't know who he is, he's one of the top players in the world. He just won the US Open, which is one of the most important tournaments, if not the most important tournament of the year. And he's doing this series called Break 50, where he invites either celebrities or pro golfers.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to watch. Sometimes, and most of the times, it's really more fun to watch than the PGA Tour.
Exactly, and one of those guests he had on Break 50, well, he's had really a bunch of celebrities, but one of his podcast guests or show guests that we'll talk about later is Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Who me and Nico both have feelings about. But one interesting thing that we're going to talk about in later episodes is, when we talk about some of the political dimensions to LIV Golf and their connection to Saudi Arabia, they also have extensive ties to Trump, a lot of the courses at his events. And as we mentioned, he kind of has good relationships with a lot of those players. So we'll be talking about that on a later episode. But I do think that's interesting you brought up Bryson, because he's somebody that was, kind of well-known when he was on the tour. But LIV is something that has really raised him to another level. And I think you have a lot of people who really don't watch golf at all, but watch his YouTube channel, and they really like him. And so that's why it was kind of almost surreal to see him win the U.S. Open this year, because, he had a bunch of people rooting for him that really don't watch golf. So that was interesting. And, I'm not a big Bryson fan, but he definitely brought a lot of eyeballs to the sport that usually don't come of it. I guess the final thing I want to kind of ask you about is all this stuff we see on social media. You probably follow a lot of different golf accounts. Do you think that is, have you seen a shift in recent years in terms of how LIV was covered when it first started and how it's covered now? Are people becoming more open to the idea of LIV Golf?
Yes, in my circle, yes. Like, I have friends back home that just like they knew the sport of golf. Mm-hmm. They knew Tiger Woods, yeah, but everybody knows Tiger Woods. Mm-hmm. But since then, they did you see that Bryson or posted this video or mm-hmm. social media or this or whatever? Mm-hmm. Since the merge of LIV, it has brought more fans to the sport, more attention, and even from people that I never expected to like golf. Yeah. Or even talk to me about golf.
Exactly. And I mean, that's, it's hard to tell based on the ratings, but one thing you can definitely tell just on YouTube views and things like that is LIV has a fan base that the PGA Tour has not previously had access to it. Yeah. We think of golf as kind of an old white guy's sport, and mm-hmm. to some extent, I think LIV is trying to change that perception. And just based on what you've told us here today, it sounds like maybe they're making some headway in that department, because that's one thing that they would say they're offering the game is a younger, more diverse audience. And I think it's an open question how successful that'll be, but it sounds like from what you've said, they're making some headway in that department.
Yes, they are, Bubba. They are making big moves. And, recent, we have the Bryson and Koepka against Rory and Scheffler. Yeah. That would never be impossible if LIV never happened. And that's just going to bring more fans to the sport. For either LIV or PGA Tour, that's just going to bring more people into the world of golf.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Nico, I want to thank you for coming on and talking about kind of your experience with LIV. I think it's something that a lot of U.S. fans probably don't experience, so it's probably something that people need to be more open about. We've had a couple of guests on now who have offered a more pro-LIV side, and obviously I'm going to be talking about some of the critiques with LIV, but I think it's definitely a good thing to have people on who kind of can share maybe some of the more positive sides to it and why it shouldn't just be dismissed outright. So, Nico, thanks for coming on today.
No, thank you, Boa. It's a pleasure. Great podcast, man.
Yeah, thank you.
The best.